What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma. It's been a little while since I made a top 10 video, but with the release of the Commander Lilith DLC, I figured it would be appropriate to go over what I think are now the 10 best rocket launchers in Borderlands 2. Now, real quick, and because we've got quite a bit to go over, the rankings here are going to be somewhat subjective and will be weighted based on how powerful, how rare, and how useful or good a given rocket launcher is. All of the launchers that made it onto this list are pretty good choices, though the higher ranked launchers tend to be truly exceptional and most useful. Also, I totally promise this video doesn't include the bunny, so be sure to smash like if you think the bunny is bad, and if you like the bunny, also be sure to smash like. But enough intro, let's get into the video, starting with our number 10 entry, which is going to be the Hive. Despite its niche status, the Hive is actually a pretty decent and fun rocket launcher to use. Unlike many other rocket launchers, which fire rockets that explode upon hitting an enemy or surface, the Hive fires a rocket that deploys a spinning orb, which emits corrosive needles that then home in on enemies. Unfortunately, you won't be able to get this thing in all elements, but you will find that the Hive is a great choice against many corrosive vulnerable enemies like loaders and other types of Hyperion bots. The main reason I ranked the Hive a little lower on this list is because of the somewhat unpredictable nature of its projectiles. Where other rocket launchers deal damage directly and immediately, you have to wait for the Hive's needles to hit targets, which makes the prospect of getting a second wind a bit risky. With that in mind, I think you'll find that you're better off leading off with the Hive and pairing it with either a B shield or Gage's Anarchy skill to help buff the damage. In both cases, it might also be a good idea to pair it with the Grog Nozzle's Drunk effect. That way you can kind of counteract some of the ammo consumption, and you can increase the projectile count or number of spawning needles at no additional ammo cost. In the end, the Hive is a pretty great rocket launcher, and while it's not always the best launcher to use, it could sure be a lot of fun to use. If you want one of these things, the Hive can drop from Saturn in the Arid Nexus Badlands. It's a pretty rare drop, so just be aware of that if you decide to go for it. Number 9. The Neukom. While I do think it's on the weaker side, especially when compared to some rocket launchers I'll be discussing shortly, the Neukom is for the most part a pretty good rocket launcher. Unlike its non-unique counterparts, which fire a more conventional rocket, the Neukom fires a projectile in an arc that then explodes, emitting a mushroom cloud and a nova-like shockwave in the process. The closer foes are to the center of the blast, the more damage that's dealt, while the further enemies are from the blast, the less damage that's dealt. Though the Neukom's Nova/Shockwave increases the likelihood that you'll successfully hit what you fire at, I think the damage variance that can occur based on the target's distance from the center of the blast can make using the Neukom difficult. Add on the fact that the Neukom consumes 2 ammo per shot, where other Torg rocket launchers may only consume just 1, and you can easily find yourself in situations where it feels like you're reloading the Neukom more than you're actually shooting it. Especially if you get a Neukom that has bad parts. Even still, I think the Neukom is a decent rocket launcher, and fortunately, the developers at Gearbox improved it in an entry that I'll be discussing a little bit later. If you'd like a Neukom, it can drop from the Black Queen, which is a spider ant that sometimes spawns behind Ellie's garage in the dust. And it's also worth noting that the Black Queen can also spawn during District Peak runs as well. Number 8. The Ahab. In terms of base damage, the Ahab is the strongest of all Torg rocket launchers in Borderlands 2. Though this presents its own benefits in that the Ahab just so happens to be the best Torg rocket launcher to pair with the Flakka or Pimpernel to boost both of those weapons' damage potential, it doesn't translate into the Ahab being the strongest of the Torg rocket launchers. This is in part due to the Ahab's somewhat limited range, but it also comes down to the non-elemental damage that it primarily deals. Unlike conventional explosive damage like you might see on most Torg weapons, this damage can't be boosted by explosive elemental relics, and given that the non-elemental damage is resisted by armor, it limits the Ahab's capabilities against loaders. This said though, the harpoon projectiles are definitely fun to use, and while they require a bit more accuracy than what's required for other weapons, I'd say it's not really so much so to where the Ahab is impossible to use. And also, if you do decide that you hate the Ahab as a conventional rocket launcher, you can always just keep it to boost the damage of weapons like the Flakka or the Pimpernel. If you want an Ahab, you can obtain one by farming Master Gi from the Captain Scarlet DLC in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. Though this can be a pain, if you can get one with a good swap speed, I think you'll agree that it's definitely worth it, and it is a great weapon to pair with the Flacker. Number 7. The Derp. Aside from being a funny word, and be sure to smash like for funny words, the Derp is a non-unique launcher from Torg that possesses the Torg rocket launcher barrel. While this barrel features a few stat decreases and isn't quite as powerful as the Etech barrel is, the Torg barrel still makes the Derp a pretty powerful launcher, and in my experience, you're getting pretty decent power while mostly retaining an ammo cost of about 1 ammo per shot. This is in contrast to a number of other Torg rocket launchers that are actually rarer, like the Neukom and Tunguska. And if you were to pair the Derp against the legendary Neukom, you're in a situation where you may be able to fire more powerful shots with the Neukom, but you can fire just 2 rockets with the Derp that may inadvertently deal more damage overall. You may also find you prefer the more standard rocket projectile on this thing when compared to the arcing projectiles that you see on the Neukom or the Tunguska. So I think that's something else to consider when choosing this rocket launcher as well. If you want a Derp, you're going to have to keep an eye out for one, as they can drop from any suitable loot source. Just be sure to get one with decent parts, as you don't want to spend too much time reloading. Number 6. The Tediore Etech Launcher. Originally, I had intended on sticking to only one Etech launcher in this video. However, given that Tediore Etech launchers are so good on Krieg, it felt appropriate to include the Tediore Etech launcher, or more simply, the launcher, on this list. Like most other Etech launchers, the Tediore launcher possesses the signature blue orb cataclysm effect, which greatly increases your blast radius and, by extension, the amount of damage you can deal. And like other Tediore launchers, the Etech launcher can be thrown at enemies and explode on impact, dealing explosive damage. Now normally, the reload damage tends to be lower than the actual rocket damage, and thus, this aspect of the weapon isn't usually used. But if you put together an explosive Krieg build and have enough Bloodlust stacks to boost this thing's magazine size, you can get the reload damage to an impressively high value. This much damage can allow you to one-shot most mobs, and when it's combined with Bloodsplosion, you should be able to rack up some pretty high overkill damage. Now, it is true that this is a very niche use of a rocket launcher that you can only really take advantage of on Krieg, and that's mainly why I've placed it at 6th place. Even still, the reload damage capability can be quite powerful, and I think makes the Tediore Etech launcher worth considering as one of the best rocket launchers in the game. Like other non-uniques, it doesn't have a designated drop and can drop from any suitable loot source, so just be sure to keep your eyes peeled. Number 5. The Creamer. Personally, I think the Creamer is a somewhat overlooked rocket launcher in Borderlands 2. This is because it used to be, and to a certain extent still is, locked behind the Creature Slaughterdome DLC that's accessed from the Wildlife Exploitation Preserve. While PC players may need to buy the DLC first, once you have the DLC and have completed all 5 rounds of the Creature Slaughter, you'll receive the Creamer as a reward. As for the launcher itself, it's a Moxie weapon that heals the player at a rate of 2% for damage dealt, while also possessing a unique projectile pattern where the initial rocket explodes and splits into 2 after a certain distance. While these attributes may seem insignificant at first, the Creamer's high base damage makes up for the reduced healing percentage, and assuming you're able to properly gauge the damage at which the initial projectile explodes, the Creamer could actually allow you to deal more damage than what's listed, as each split projectile deals 80% the damage of the initial, which is pretty good if you ask me. Ultimately, the Creamer's healing and split projectile capabilities can make it a great choice. So if you're willing to take the time to complete the Creature Slaughterdome for one, I think you definitely should. Number 4. The World Burn. Newly added as a result of the Commander Lilith DLC, the World Burn is quite possibly the most unconventional yet the best of the Torg rocket launchers. Though it's not quite as powerful as the Ahab in terms of base damage, and its fire elemental exclusivity limits it against armored enemies, the World Burn has the advantage of basically being a better version of the Neukom with very low ammo consumption. After all, the Neukom can only fire maybe 1 or 2 shots before needing to reload, while the World Burn can fire at least 5 or 6 at a much lower ammo cost. If you ask me, the only thing that would make the World Burn better would be if it came in all elements. That way, it would be as versatile and as desirable as some of the better launchers that we'll be discussing next. Overall though, the Worldburn is a pretty great rocket launcher, and if you want it, your best bet is to farm it from Lieutenant Bolson in the Dull Abandoned in the Commander Lilith DLC. In my experience, it drops fairly frequently, so it's something you should seek out if you're looking for a pretty powerful fire launcher. Number 3. The Topnia. One of the signature or more desirable aspects of Vladof rocket launchers is that they have the ability to allow the player to fire rockets that don't consume ammo. This is an ability that's shared by the Vladof Topnia, which just so happens to be the Etech variant of your standard Vladof launcher. Like most of its other Etech brethren, with the exception of the Bandit variant, the Topnia has the signature blue orb cataclysm effect that's reminiscent of the BFG from Doom, in that it covers a huge blast radius and deals a ton of damage. However, what I think sets the Topnia apart and makes it the best non-unique Etech launcher is that it possesses a high fire rate and possesses the chance to not consume ammo that you see on other Vladof launchers. This allows the player to quickly fire off a few rockets at lower ammo consumption than some of the better unique and legendary rocket launchers that are known for their low ammo consumption. Add on the fact that you're getting that blue orb cataclysm effect like the Norfleet has, and it becomes pretty easy to understand why the Topnia is so desirable. Though it doesn't have a designated drop since it's a non-unique, I would highly recommend you keep an eye out for one of these as you play through the game. Topnias can be quite powerful and will make for a great rocket launcher assuming you can get your hands on one. Number 2. The Badaboom. Though it's only at number 2, the Badaboom is a very versatile and powerful rocket launcher. Perhaps its greatest strength is that the Badaboom, like the Worldburn, has relatively low ammo consumption per shot and a high magazine size when compared to other rocket launchers. However, and unlike the Worldburn, the Badaboom has the advantage of being able to come in multiple elements, which ends up making it a more versatile option, assuming you can get it in multiple elements. The other and perhaps hidden benefit of the Badaboom is that it's the best launcher in the game for rocket jumping. While I wouldn't recommend you make attempts with an elemental or high-level version, if you got yourself at least 2 explosive low-level Badabooms, you could use those to traverse and get into out-of-map areas, which can be an entertaining experience in itself. The only thing that I'd say really holds this thing back is the fact that our number 1 highest entry is just that good, exceeding many of the Badaboom's capabilities. In fact, if you find you're having a hard time getting the number 1 entry, the Badaboom could make for a great alternative, and if you want it, your best bet is to farm King Mong, who is located out in the Iridium Blight. And for our final entry, number 1, the Mongol. I did promise you guys that the bunny would not be number 1, and really, to be honest, the Mongol isn't either. The Mongol is pretty good in the pre-sequel, but it's not quite as good in Borderlands 2. So let's go ahead and declare our actual number 1, which is going to be the Norfleet. So I'm sure this won't be a surprise to anyone, but the Norfleet is the strongest launcher in the game. Not only does it possess the blue orb cataclysm effect that you see on most Etech launchers, but it also possesses really high base damage and a ×3 projectile multiplier, ensuring that whatever enemies can't escape will either be really hurt or will basically be vaporized. In a way, I think you could say that the Norfleet is essentially perfect. Thanks to its powerful damage output and the fact that it can deal all that damage over a large area, you can use the Norfleet as the perfect rocket launcher to get out a fight for your life, or even as a primary weapon for clearing out a bunch of mobs. Add on the fact that this thing can come in pretty much every element but explosive, and I think it's safe to say that once you've got your hands on a Norfleet, it may end up being the only rocket launcher you'll ever need, and it might be hard to go back to some of the other launchers that are available. As far as acquisition goes, there are plenty of ways to get your hands on a Norfleet. If you're a solo player, I'd recommend you farm Hyperius from the Captain Scarlet DLC, as he will be the best potential drop source in that scenario. Assuming you have some friends though, and you're willing to try and spawn Vermivorous, then that's the vanilla game boss that the Norfleet normally spawns from, and in that case, that would probably be the best choice. Either way, I'd recommend you pick one, because if you can get your hands on one of these launchers, you will agree that it is truly amazing. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to leave a like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload more Borderlands videos, and as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.